I used to believe that if I did everything right, my life would eventually start to feel right too. That belief cost me more years than I'm comfortable admitting. If you had asked me back then whether I was happy, I would have hesitated, not because I was miserable, but because I had trained myself to confuse approval with fulfillment. People around me were satisfied. That had to count for something. At least, that's what I told myself. The first lie I ever told myself was a reasonable one. This isn't what I want, but it's what makes sense. I said it when I chose stability over curiosity. I said it when I stayed quiet instead of honest. I said it when I ignored the subtle grief that followed me from room to room like a shadow I pretended not to see. My life didn't collapse. That's the cruel part. It solidified. Everything became fixed. Predictable. Efficient. I became dependable in the way that slowly erases you. The kind of person others lean on without noticing the strain. The kind of person whose needs are assumed to be minimal because they never make them visible. I learned how to smile at the right moments. How to nod convincingly. How to say it's fine with enough confidence that people stopped asking follow-up questions. Inside, something else was happening. Every choice I made felt smaller than the one before it. Not wrong, just diminished. As if I were slowly trading range for safety, depth for control. I didn't panic. I adapted. That was my talent. There is a specific kind of regret that doesn't hurt immediately. It waits. It watches. It lets you build an entire identity on top of it before it begins to speak. For me, it started in quiet moments. Late evenings. Early mornings. Those brief gaps when there was no one to impress and nothing urgent to manage. In those spaces, I felt an unfamiliar tightness in my chest. Not sadness. Not anxiety. Loss. But I couldn't explain what I had lost, which made it easy to dismiss. You can't grieve something you can't name. So I didn't. I stayed busy. I stayed useful. I stayed admired for my restraint. People praised my discipline. My maturity. My ability to do what needs to be done. No one noticed that what needed to be done was slowly killing my curiosity. The most damaging choices aren't reckless ones. They're the ones that feel responsible. They come with applause. They come with reassurance. They come wrapped in logic and approval, and by the time you realize the cost, you've already paid it in full. I remember the moment it finally broke through. I was sitting at a table with people who cared about me, listening to a conversation I had participated in 100 times before. Same topics. Same jokes. Same predictable rhythm. Everyone was comfortable. And suddenly, without warning, I felt like a guest in my own life. Not disconnected. Not bored. Replaceable. The realization was brutal in its clarity. If I disappeared tomorrow, the structure would remain intact. Someone else would fill the space. The system wouldn't notice my absence, only the temporary inconvenience of adjustment. I laughed at something someone said and felt nothing behind it. That terrified me. I had spent so long becoming reliable that I had forgotten how to be necessary, not to others, but to myself. My inner world had gone quiet, not because it was peaceful, but because I had stopped visiting it. That night, lying in bed, I replayed my life not as a series of mistakes, but as a series of avoided risks. All the moments I had chosen safety not because it aligned with my values, but because it prevented discomfort. I realized then that I hadn't failed at life. I had followed instructions perfectly. And the instructions were wrong for me. There was no villain to blame. No single turning point. Just 1,000 small concessions made in the name of being sensible. I had become fluent in compromise, but illiterate in desire. The dark secret I never shared was this: I didn't feel alive, and I didn't know when that stopped being normal. I told myself that everyone feels this way eventually. That adulthood is supposed to feel muted. That passion is a phase you outgrow. These beliefs were comforting because they excused my silence. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't tired because life was hard. I was tired because I was living someone else's idea of a good one. The most painful part wasn't the regret. It was the realization that I had actively participated in my own erasure politely, patiently, with a smile. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That was the beginning of the breakdown. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a slow internal collapse as the life I had built began to feel unbearably foreign, imposed, misaligned. I didn't know yet whether I would leave, change, or simply break. I only knew one thing for certain: continuing like this would cost me whatever was left of me. After that realization, nothing immediately changed. That's another lie people tell about awakening, that once you see the truth, action follows naturally. For me, awareness didn't bring movement. It brought paralysis. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what I was allowed to do about it. There is a moral trap in doing what's expected of you. Over time, responsibility becomes a cage that looks like virtue from the outside. You're praised for staying, for enduring, for not causing disruption. And eventually, you internalize the idea that wanting more is selfish. That belief kept me stuck longer than fear ever could. Every option felt unethical in some way. Leaving meant disappointing people who had invested in me. Staying meant continuing a life that felt increasingly dishonest. There was no choice that didn't involve loss, and I had spent my entire life avoiding loss at all costs. So I stalled. I woke up every day and followed the routine, now fully aware that I was acting. I answered questions with rehearsed sincerity. I fulfilled obligations with a precision that bordered on resentment. I smiled, and this time I knew exactly why it felt hollow. Knowing you're lying to yourself changes the texture of everything. Conversations became exhausting because I had to translate my real thoughts into acceptable versions. Decisions felt heavier because I no longer believed in the reasons behind them. Even rest felt performative, like something I had earned rather than needed. The guilt grew quietly. Not guilt for wanting something different, but guilt for not having the courage to want it openly. I began to see myself as weak, not because I lacked discipline, but because I lacked honesty. And that self-contempt was far more corrosive than any external criticism could have been. At night, my mind replayed moments I had brushed aside for years. Opportunities one declined because they felt risky. Conversations I avoided because they might change things. Feelings I suppressed because they didn't fit the life I had already committed to. I wasn't haunted by what I did wrong. I was haunted by what I never allowed myself to try. There's a special kind of despair that comes from realizing you've been the primary obstacle in your own life. You can't direct that anger outward. You can't blame circumstances forever. Eventually, it turns inward and asks the question you fear most: if no one forced you into this, why did you stay? The answer was uncomfortable in its simplicity. Because staying made me look good. Staying reinforced the image of competence and reliability I had carefully built. Staying allowed others to feel secure. Staying protected me from judgment, even as it slowly erased my inner world. Leaving, on the other hand, would require explaining myself. And explanations invite scrutiny. They invite disagreement. They invite people to tell you that you're wrong about your own life. I wasn't sure I could survive that. The idea of disappointing people terrified me more than disappointing myself. That realization didn't make me proud. It made me ashamed. I had prioritized being acceptable over being alive, and I had done it convincingly. I started to notice how often I used the word should when thinking about my future. I should stay. I should be grateful. I should stop overthinking. I should want this. Very rarely did I ask what I actually wanted. And when I did, the answer felt embarrassingly quiet. Not a grand dream. Not a dramatic reinvention. Just space. Autonomy. The ability to choose without justifying it to everyone else first. That felt dangerously close to selfishness. One afternoon, I caught myself fantasizing about disappearing for a while. Not dying. Not escaping in a dramatic sense. Just stepping out of the version of myself everyone recognized and seeing what remained. The thought scared me and relieved me in equal measure. I knew I couldn't vanish without consequences. People would worry. They would speculate. They would feel abandoned, and part of me believed that enduring my quiet misery was the fair price for not causing them discomfort. But another part, the part I had ignored for too long, asked a brutal question: is it ethical to sacrifice your entire life to protect others from temporary disappointment? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. What I know is that the longer I stayed, the more resentful I became. And resentment has a way of leaking out, even when you try to contain it. I grew distant. Less patient. Less present. The very people I was trying to protect from pain were already losing the best parts of me, replaced by a hollow imitation. That's when the dilemma shifted. Staying wasn't neutral anymore. It was actively dishonest. And dishonesty, even quiet dishonesty, damages everyone involved. The realization didn't free me. It cornered me. I understood then that no choice would leave me innocent. I could either hurt others quickly by changing, or hurt everyone slowly by staying the same. For the first time, endurance felt less like virtue and more like avoidance. I didn't know what I would do next. I only knew that continuing as I was had become a form of self-betrayal I could no longer justify morally. Something had to break. Either the life I was living or the illusion that I could keep living it without consequence. The breaking point didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, I was used to that. This was different. It was the weariness that comes from maintaining a lie long after you understand it's a lie. From waking up every day and negotiating with yourself about how much of your truth you're willing to suppress just to keep the peace. One morning, I realized I was no longer choosing my life. I was managing it. Managing expectations. Managing reactions. Managing disappointment, both mine and everyone else's. I had turned existence into administration, and I was very good at it. That was the most disturbing part. There was no dramatic escape. No packed bags waiting by the door. No carefully rehearsed speech. What changed was quieter and far more dangerous. I stopped pretending that staying was neutral. For years, I had framed my endurance as kindness. As maturity. As sacrifice. But now I saw it clearly for what it was: fear dressed up as responsibility. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of being judged. The fear of stepping into a life that didn't come with approval already attached. And beneath all of it, the fear of discovering that I had waited too long. That fear followed me everywhere. I began to imagine myself 10, 20 years into the future, still explaining my choices in the same tired language, still telling myself that someday I would feel differently. The image didn't make me sad. It made me feel trapped. The truth is, I didn't want a new life. I wanted my life back, the one I had slowly abandoned in favor of being sensible. The one where curiosity mattered, where desire wasn't something to be justified. Where I didn't feel like a guest in my own decisions. The day I finally acted wasn't significant to anyone else. No one noticed. That's how invisible the change was from the outside. But internally, something shifted permanently. I started saying no without explanations. Not dramatically, just quietly, firmly. I allowed people to be confused. I let their discomfort exist without rushing to fix it. I chose options that didn't make sense on paper but felt honest in my body. Each small act of defiance felt wrong at first. Then unfamiliar. Then necessary. The guilt didn't disappear. It transformed. Instead of guilt for wanting more, I felt guilt for how long I had denied it. For how many years I had spent teaching myself to settle. For how convincingly I had played a role that slowly hollowed me out. Some relationships didn't survive the change. Others adjusted awkwardly. A few surprised me with understanding I hadn't expected. That taught me something important: not everyone needed me to stay the same I had assumed they did. That assumption had kept me imprisoned. There was a moment, weeks later, when I caught my reflection in a window and didn't immediately critique it. I didn't measure it against an ideal. I just recognized myself. That simple recognition felt like reconciliation. I wasn't happier in a conventional sense. My life wasn't easier. In some ways, it was harder. Uncertainty replaced predictability. Silence replaced validation. Choice replaced instruction. But for the first time, the weight I carried felt earned. Here's what I understand now: after everything, doing what everyone expects is not the same as doing what is right. Expectations are often inherited, not examined. They reward compliance, not alignment. And when you build a life entirely on them, you don't fail loudly, you fade quietly. I didn't ruin my life in one dramatic mistake. I nearly ruined it by being agreeable. By mistaking approval for purpose. By confusing endurance with virtue. By believing that wanting something different was a flaw instead of information. The second chance didn't arrive as forgiveness from others. It arrived as permission from myself, permission to be inconsistent, unfinished, and occasionally disappointing. I didn't escape my life. I stopped abandoning myself inside it. And if there is a lesson worth leaving behind, it's this: a life that looks right but feels wrong will eventually demand payment. You can pay with courage now or with regret later. I paid late. But not too late to finally live a life that belongs to me.